Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty cool story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. So get cozy, enjoy it, and watch it till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Across a million worlds, beneath alien suns, and in the cold void between the stars, the endless grinding conflict that is the Imperium's existence grinds on without pause, without mercy, without hope of true victory. The galaxy itself has become a battlefield where every breath is won through violence, where peace is nothing more than the brief pause between massacres. The forces arrayed against humanity are legion, numberless as the stars themselves. Alien species that view mankind as nothing more than prey. Heretics who have turned from the Emperor's light to worship dark gods that hunger for the destruction of all things. Rogue artificial intelligences that seek to exterminate organic life wherever it can be found. And perhaps most terrible of all, the traitors. Those who once stood as humanity's greatest defenders and now seek its utter annihilation. Against these threats stand the Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes, the Angels of Death. These superhuman warriors are humanity's finest weapon, genetically engineered post-human soldiers who each stand as tall as the heroes of ancient legend. Clad in powered armor that can turn aside small arms' fire as easily as rain, wielding weapons that can reduce enemies to atoms with a single shot, these warriors are the elite of the elite, chosen from among billions and transformed through agonizing procedures into living weapons. Each Space Marine is worth 100 normal soldiers, capable of feats of strength and endurance that defy belief. They can fight for days without rest, survive wounds that would kill a normal human instantly, and process tactical information faster than any unaugmented mind could manage. But even among the Space Marines, some chapters stand apart from the rest, their names spoken with reverence and fear in equal measure. The Space Wolves are one such chapter. Hailing from the death world of Fenris, a planet of ice and fury where survival itself is a daily battle, these warriors embody the savage nobility of their primarch, Leman Russ, the Wolf King, who walked at the Emperor's side during the Great Crusade 10,000 years ago. They are not the cold, calculating warriors of chapters, like the Ultramarines, who follow the Codex Astartes with religious devotion. They are not the grim, unyielding defenders, like the Imperial Fists, who view warfare as a sacred duty to be discharged with stoic determination. The Space Wolves are wolves in truth as well as name, fierce hunters who fight not just with skill and strength, but with a barely controlled savagery that echoes the predatory beasts from which they take their name. Their gene seed, the biological template that transforms normal humans into Space Marines, is unique among all the chapters. It carries within it something called the Canis Helix, a genetic modification that awakens primal instincts within those who receive it. This blessing and curse grants Space Wolves enhanced senses, allowing them to smell the fear on their enemies, to track targets across impossible distances, to sense threats before they materialize. But it also brings with it the constant danger of losing control, of giving in to the beast within, and becoming lost to the rage that lurks in every son of Russ. The line between man and monster is thin for the Space Wolves, and every warrior must walk it carefully, lest he fall to one side or the other. Among the countless legends that the Space Wolves have accumulated over their 10,000-year history, few burn as bright as that of Ragnar Blackmane. The youngest Wolf Lord in the entire history of the chapter, his saga is written in the blood of Xenos and traitors across 1,000 battlefields, each victory adding another verse to a story that seems destined to be sung for generations to come. He has faced the most terrible enemies the galaxy can produce and emerged victorious. He has led his warriors through campaigns that would have broken lesser chapters. He has stood against demon princes and warlords, sorcerers and Xenos abominations, and each time he has prevailed through a combination of tactical brilliance and sheer unstoppable fury. But of all his deeds, of all the enemies he has slain and the victories he has won, one stands above the rest. one battle that would define his destiny and cement his place among the heroes of the Imperium. One confrontation that would test everything he had learned, everything he had become, and determine whether he was truly worthy of the title Wolf Lord. This is the story of how a young space marine, driven by grief and fury, hunted down and killed a champion of the dark gods, a warrior so steeped in corruption and demonic power that he had slain one of the greatest wolf lords the chapter had ever known. It is a story of vengeance and justice, of bonds that death cannot break, of the terrible price that must sometimes be paid to uphold the honor of the space wolves. To understand the magnitude of this deed, we must first understand what a Chaos Champion truly is, and why facing one in single combat is considered by many to be a death sentence. In the twisted hierarchy of the traitor legions and renegade warbands that plague the Imperium, a Chaos Champion represents the absolute pinnacle of mortal achievement in the service of the dark gods. These are not merely skilled warriors or experienced veterans. They are living embodiments of their god's will. Warriors who have climbed a mountain of corpses to reach a position where they stand just one step away from demon princehood itself. The journey to becoming a Chaos Champion is long and agonizing, requiring not just centuries of warfare, but acts of such violence and depravity that they would make even hardened Imperial Guardsmen lose their sanity simply from hearing about them. These warriors have bathed in the blood of worlds, have watched civilizations burn at their command, have committed atrocities that would fill volumes if anyone dared to catalogue them. Many Chaos Champions are former Space Marines, warriors who once served the Emperor with distinction during the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago, but who succumbed to corruption during that galaxy-spanning civil war. These ancient traitors have had millennia to perfect their craft, to gather power, to earn the favor of their chosen deity through countless offerings of blood and souls. Others are more recent converts, Space Marines who have fallen to chaos in the 10,000 years since the heresy ended. These warriors may be younger in absolute terms, but their path to championship is no less difficult. They must prove themselves worthy through acts that mark them as special, even among the damned. They must demonstrate not just martial prowess, which any competent Space Marine possesses, but an absolute devotion to their god that transcends reason or sanity. They must be willing to sacrifice everything, including their humanity, their sanity, and their very souls, in pursuit of power and glory. The physical transformation that accompanies this rise to prominence is both terrible and fascinating. A Chaos Champion's body begins to warp and change as demonic essence seeps into their flesh, rewriting their biology according to patterns that defy the laws of nature. Their strength increases beyond even the superhuman capabilities of a Space Marine, allowing them to crush ceramite with their bare hands, to tear through reinforced bulkheads as though they were paper, to lift and throw objects that should require vehicles to move. Their speed becomes preternatural, allowing them to dodge bullets and lass fire, to cross impossible distances in the blink of an eye, to strike from angles that should not exist in three-dimensional space. But the changes go deeper than mere physical enhancement. A champion on the path to demon princehood begins to exist partially in the warp itself, their presence creating distortions in reality that can be felt by those sensitive to such things. The air around them grows thick and heavy, as though reality itself is struggling to contain their existence. Shadows move in unnatural ways in their presence. Time itself can seem to slow or speed up in the space around them. Lesser warriors find their minds clouding when they try to focus on the champion, their thoughts becoming confused, their instincts screaming at them to flee, even as their training demands they stand and fight. Many champions carry demon-bound weapons, artifacts of terrible power that house malevolent entities eager to feast on the souls of those they kill. These weapons are alive in a very real sense, possessed of intelligence and malice that rivals any mortal mind. They whisper to their wielders, offering advice, demanding blood, promising greater power if only more sacrifices can be provided. An axe might house a bloodletter of horn a demon of rage and slaughter that hungers eternally for combat. A sword might contain a demon of Slanesh, whispering promises of sensation and pleasure, even as it carves through armor and flesh. These weapons can cut through virtually any material, their edges existing partially in the warp where conventional physics holds no sway. Others have been blessed with mutations that remake their bodies into living weapons. Extra limbs sprout from their torsos, each one capable of wielding a weapon or simply rending with claws sharp enough to cut through plasteel. Wings of membrane and bone burst from their backs, allowing them to soar through the air with terrible grace. Eyes open in impossible places on their bodies, granting them vision in all directions simultaneously, making it nearly impossible to surprise them. Horns grow from their skulls, both decorative and deadly, marking them as chosen of their god. Some develop the ability to regenerate wounds that would kill normal space marines, their flesh knitting back together even as new injuries are inflicted. The psychic pressure exerted by a Chaos Champion is perhaps the most insidious aspect of their power. Even those with no psychic sensitivity at all can feel it, a weight pressing down on their souls, making every breath feel like it requires conscious effort, every movement feel like pushing through water. For those with even rudimentary psychic abilities, the experience can be overwhelming. They see the champion not as they appear in the material world, but as they truly are, a nexus of warp energy, a hole in reality through which the malevolence of chaos pours like poison. Some psychers have been driven mad simply from looking too long at a Chaos Champion, their minds unable to process the contradictions and impossibilities they perceive. When such a being walks onto a battlefield, the very nature of combat changes. Normal tactics become irrelevant when facing an opponent who can shrug off wounds that would kill squads of normal soldiers, who moves faster than targeting systems can track, who radiates an aura of terror that can break even veteran regiments. Even the bravest warriors feel the touch of fear when confronting a Chaos Champion. Not the rational fear that comes from recognizing danger, but a primal, existential dread that speaks to something deep in the human psyche. This is fear of the predator, of the monster in the dark, of the thing that should not exist, but does anyway. Imperial forces have developed specific protocols for dealing with Chaos Champions when they appear on the battlefield. Heavy weapons are brought to bear immediately, las cannons and plasma cannons that can level buildings focused on single targets, in the hope of overwhelming them through sheer firepower. Psychers are deployed to counter the warp-based abilities that champions possess, though this is always a desperate gamble, as the Psychers often find themselves outmatched by the demonic essence flowing through their opponent. In some cases, entire Imperial Guard regiments are considered acceptable losses if they can tie up a champion long enough for more specialized forces to arrive. The calculus is brutal, but necessary. Better to sacrifice thousands of normal soldiers than allow a Chaos Champion to rampage unchecked through your lines. For Space Marines facing a Chaos Champion, the challenge is different, but no less daunting. Space Marines possess the training, equipment, and genetic enhancements necessary to actually harm these powerful foes. But even a Astartes warrior must be wary. A single champion can easily overwhelm a squad of Space Marines if they approach the engagement carelessly. The usual tactics of suppressive fire and coordinated assaults often fail when the target can simply ignore incoming fire and charge directly into the squad, scattering them like leaves before a storm. Successful engagements against champions typically require careful planning, overwhelming force, and a willingness to accept casualties that would be unthinkable in normal operations. The path from Chaos Champion to Demon Prince is the ultimate goal for many of these warriors, though few ever achieve it. To ascend requires not just martial prowess and countless victories, but the absolute favor of one's chosen deity. The champion must have proven themselves so utterly devoted, so completely corrupted, so valuable to their god's plans, that the deity chooses to elevate them beyond mortal concerns entirely. The transformation is both reward and curse. The The champion's soul is bound irrevocably to their god. They can never die in any meaningful sense. Even if their physical form is destroyed, their essence retreats to the warp where it can be reconstituted, ready to fight again. They gain powers that defy description, abilities that allow them to reshape reality itself according to their will. But they also lose something fundamental in the process. Whatever remained of their humanity, whatever spark of their original self still existed beneath the layers of corruption, is extinguished in the fires of ascension. They become extensions of their god's will, no longer truly independent beings, but avatars of the ruinous power's endless hunger for destruction and chaos. For some champions, this price is too high, and they resist the final transformation, preferring to remain on the cusp of demon princehood rather than surrender the last vestiges of their identity. Others embrace it eagerly, seeing ascension as the ultimate validation of everything they have done, every sacrifice they have made in their god's name. Ragnar Blackmane was born on the death world of Fenris, a planet of ice and fury, where only the strong survive. He came into the world as Ragnar Thunderfist, a son of the Thunderfist tribe, one of the many scattered clans that eke out a brutal existence on that unforgiving world. From his earliest days, it was clear that Ragnar was different. While other children his age played at war, Ragnar fought as though his life depended on it, because in truth, it did. On Fenris, weakness is death. The harsh environment, the predatory wildlife, the constant tribal warfare, all conspire to cull the weak from the strong. Those who survive learn to be hard, to be cunning, to be fierce beyond measure. Ragnar learned these lessons well. By the time he reached his teenage years, he was already a formidable warrior by Fenrisian standards, able to stand shield to shield with men twice his age. He was fast where others were merely quick, strong where others were merely powerful. There was a fire in him, a barely controlled rage that his elders recognized and feared. It was the rage of the wolf, the savage fury that lurks in the heart of every true son of Fenris. Channeled properly, such rage could make a man unstoppable. Left unchecked, it would consume him utterly. The defining moment of Ragnar's youth came on a night that would be forever burned into his memory. The Grimskulls, a rival tribe with whom the Thunderfists had feuded for generations, chose that night to launch a surprise attack. They came in the darkness, when most of the Thunderfist warriors were deep in their cups, celebrating a successful hunt. The raid was swift and brutal. Men who had fought and survived 100 battles were cut down before they could even reach their weapons. The longhouse became a charnel house, the floor slick with blood, the air thick with screams. Ragnar's father was among the first to fall, hewn down by a Grimskull axe as he tried to rally a defense. Ragnar watched him die, watched the light fade from eyes that had seen so much, had taught him so much. In that moment, something broke inside the young warrior, and something else was born. The rage that had simmered beneath the surface all his life erupted like a volcano. He threw himself at the Grimskulls with a fury that shocked even hardened warriors. His blade became a whirlwind of death, and Grimskulls fell before him like wheat before the scythe. The Grimskull champion, a youth named Striebjorn, who had slain Ragnar's father, met him in single combat. They were equals in many ways, two young warriors at the peak of their abilities, both consumed by the battle lust that defines Fenrisian combat. Their duel raged across the burning longhouse, blade meeting blade, each warrior landing blows that would have killed lesser men. In the end, they dealt each other mortal wounds, Striebjorn's axe finding Ragnar's chest, even as Ragnar's sword opened Striebjorn's throat. They collapsed together, their blood mingling on the floor, both convinced they were dying. But death was not waiting for these young warriors. Not yet. Hidden in the shadows of the burning longhouse, a figure had been watching the carnage with great interest. Wolf priest Ranek Icewalker, one of the Space Wolves' sacred recruiters, had come to the Thunderfist lands seeking candidates for transformation into the Emperor's Angels of Death. What he had witnessed in that longhouse convinced him that both Ragnar and Stribbjorn possessed the qualities the chapter sought: ferocity, courage, and above all, an indomitable will to survive. Before either youth could bleed out, Ranek's Space Marines secured them, their advanced medical technology stabilizing wounds that would have killed any normal human. When Ragnar awoke, it was in a place beyond his wildest imaginings. The Fang, the fortress monastery of the Space Wolves, rose from the heart of Azerheim like a mountain of steel and stone, its spires reaching toward the stars themselves. Here, in this place of legend, Ragnar would be reborn. The transformation from human to Space Marine is an agonizing process, a trial by fire that kills as many aspirants as it saves. Gene seed organs must be implanted, each one introducing superhuman capabilities into what was once a merely mortal frame. The body must adapt or die, and many choose death over the pain. But Ragnar endured. Through procedures that would drive strong men mad, through chemical treatments that rewrote his very biology, through psychic conditioning that tested the limits of his sanity, he endured. The rage that had defined him as a mortal became something else in the crucible of transformation, something more focused, more terrible. It was the fury of the wolf made manifest, the savage soul of Fenris distilled into a weapon of war. The final test came with the trial of Morkai, an ancient rite that every Space Wolves aspirant must face. Ragnar was taken far from the Fang, stripped naked, and left to find his way back through 1,000 miles of Fenris's most hostile wilderness. It was meant to test not just physical endurance, but mental fortitude, to see if the aspirant could maintain his humanity in the face of the beast that now lived within him. Many fail this test, giving in to the wolf and becoming wolfen, lost to the savage fury that lurks in the Space Wolf's gene seed. Ragnar nearly succumbed. As he stumbled through the frozen wastes, hypothermia and exhaustion eroding his sanity, he felt the wolf clawing at his consciousness, demanding to be released. It promised him warmth, strength, the ability to survive this ordeal. All he had to do was let go, let the beast take control. And he almost did. But then he encountered a creature that made his choice for him. The black-maned wolf was an apex predator, an alpha specimen of Fenris's most dangerous species. These massive beasts are capable of crushing ceramite in their jaws, their strength and ferocity legendary even among a world of monsters. This particular specimen had likely never met a creature it couldn't kill, couldn't dominate. It stalked Ragnar through the snow, certain of its prey, patient in its hunger. When it finally struck, it expected an easy meal. It did not account for the rage of a Space Marine aspirant with nothing left to lose. The battle that followed was primal, savage, a contest of pure will and fury. Ragnar had no weapons save his bare hands, but those hands were now capable of feats no normal human could achieve. He grappled with the beast, feeling its fangs sink into his flesh, its claws raking his body. Pain became fuel for his rage, and rage became strength. For hours they fought across the frozen landscape, neither willing to yield, neither capable of surrender. In the end, it was Ragnar's indomitable will that prevailed. His hands found the wolf's throat and squeezed until bones cracked and the great beast's struggles weakened. When it finally went limp, Ragnar didn't let go. He held on until he was absolutely certain it was dead. Then he skinned it. With numb fingers and failing strength, he peeled the great pelt from the wolf's carcass and wrapped it around himself. It would keep him warm on the long journey back to the Fang. More than that, it would mark him as something special, a warrior who had faced death itself and emerged victorious. When he finally stumbled through the gates of the Fang, clad in that midnight black pelt, the wolf priest knew they had witnessed something remarkable. From that day forward, he was no longer Ragnar Thunderfist. He was Ragnar Blackmane, and his saga was just beginning. As a Bloodclaw, the newest and most aggressive of the Space Wolves' warrior brotherhoods, Ragnar quickly distinguished himself. Bloodclaws are young, hot-headed, filled with barely controlled aggression that must be carefully managed lest it consume them. They are the tip of the spear, the first into battle, and often the first to fall. Their role is to harness that youthful fury and direct it at the enemies of the Imperium with overwhelming force. Most Bloodclaws eventually mature into grey hunters, becoming more measured and tactical. Some few rise even higher, joining the elite Wolf Guard. But Ragnar's path would be different from any who came before. His first true test came when his Bloodclaw pack stumbled upon a hidden Thousand Suns shrine deep beneath one of Fenris's mountains. The Thousand Suns, traitor space marines who had turned to the service of Tzeentch, the chaos god of sorcery and change, were ancient enemies of the Space Wolves. 10,000 years ago, the Space Wolves had been instrumental in the destruction of the Thousand Suns' homeworld of Prospero, an act that drove that entire legion into the arms of chaos. The enmity between the two chapters ran soul-deep, a hatred that transcended mere military rivalry. In that hidden shrine, Ragnar and his packmates encountered Maddox, a sorcerer of considerable power who had been conducting dark rituals beneath the very nose of the chapter. The confrontation should have been the death of every Bloodclaw present. A chaos sorcerer commands powers that can unmake reality itself, can turn a warrior's own body against him with a word, can summon demonic entities from the warp with a gesture. Against such power, young and inexperienced space marines should have been helpless. But Ragnar and Stribiorn, who despite their past as mortal enemies had become brothers in the truest sense, refused to yield. Working together, they pressed the attack with a ferocity that gave even the ancient sorcerer pause. In the confusion of battle, they managed to disrupt his concentration long enough to banish him back into the warp. It was a temporary victory, as they would later learn, but it announced to the chapter that Ragnar Blackmane was something special. His next major campaign would test him in ways that fighting could not. Inquisitor Ivan Sternberg, an old ally of Great Wolf Logan Grimner, requested the Space Wolves' aid in recovering an ancient artifact called the Talisman of Lycos. This elder relic had been split into 3 pieces and scattered across the galaxy, and Sternberg believed it was the key to stopping a deadly plague that was ravaging his homeworld. Ragnar's Bloodclaw pack was assigned to escort Sternberg and his fellow Inquisitor, Kara Izan, on this quest. What followed was an odyssey that took them across multiple worlds, each more dangerous than the last. On Galt, they battled their way through a greenskin invasion to recover one piece of the talisman from an orc warlord who had claimed it as a trophy. The greenskins, savage Xenos who live only for war, had turned the world into a charnel house. Ragnar and his pack had to infiltrate the orc lines, fighting through hordes of the brutal creatures to reach their warlord. The battle that followed was savage and unforgiving, but Ragnar's fury proved more than a match for orc brutality. The next piece was found aboard a space hulk, one of those massive agglomerations of ships and debris that drift through the warp, often infested with the most horrible creatures imaginable. This particular hulk was crawling with tyrannid genestealers, insidious Xenos creatures that could kill a space marine with a single swipe of their razor-sharp claws. The close confines of the hulk's corridors turned every engagement into a desperate melee. More than once, Ragnar found himself separated from his pack, alone in the darkness, with monsters closing in from all sides. But he refused to fall. His chainsword sang its song of death, and genestealers learned to fear the young wolf who stalked their hunting grounds. The final piece brought them to Arius, Sternberg's homeworld. What they found there was worse than any could have imagined. The planet was in the grip of a plague that had already killed millions, and the source of that plague was an ancient evil imprisoned beneath the world's surface. When they activated the completed talisman of Lycos within the Black Pyramid, an Eldar psychic construct, they unwittingly sprung a trap. Botulaz, a great unclean one of Nurgle, had orchestrated the entire quest from his prison, manipulating them into freeing him. Great unclean ones are among the most powerful daemons in existence, avatars of Nurgle's pestilence and corruption. They are mountains of diseased flesh, beings of such malevolent power that their mere presence can cause plagues to spontaneously manifest. Botulaz was one of Nurgle's favored servants, a demon who claimed to have fought the Emperor himself during the dark days of the Horus heresy. When he emerged from his prison, reality itself seemed to recoil from his corruption. The battle that followed was desperate. Inquisitor Izan attacked the demon with her psychic powers, but Botulaz swatted her aside like an insect, mortally wounding her with a casual gesture. The creature then began to weave a grand spell, tapping into the power of the Black Pyramid to animate millions of plague victims as shambling zombies. It should have been the end, but Inquisitor Izan, with her dying breath, managed to use the talisman of Lycos to seal Botulaz back into his prison. The demon howled in fury as the psychic wards slammed back into place, cutting him off from the material world once more. Ragnar had watched a demon of unimaginable power nearly destroy an entire world, had seen firsthand the corruption and malevolence that the forces of chaos could bring to bear. It was a lesson he would never forget. The galaxy was full of horrors, and only constant vigilance and unrelenting violence could hold them at bay. His actions during the Talisman quest won him great renown within the chapter, and he was inducted into the great company of Wolf Lord Beric Thunderfist. Beric was a legend among the Space Wolves, a warrior who had earned his name through his strength, and his bionic arm, which had been crafted after the original, was severed in combat with Kharn the Betrayer, one of Chaos's most feared champions. To be chosen for his company was an honor beyond measure, but Beric saw Ragnar as more than just another warrior. He saw potential, the raw materials from which truly great leaders are forged. But Ragnar's saga took an unexpected turn during the campaign on Garm, a shrine world sacred to the Space Wolves. The planet housed one of the chapter's most precious relics, the Spear of Russ, a weapon forged by the Primarch Leman Russ himself during the Great Crusade. When Chaos cultists, manipulated by Maddox once again, managed to steal the spear and use it to fuel a ritual to summon Magnus the Red, the demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, the Space Wolves responded with overwhelming force. The climactic battle took place at the moment when Magnus's Cyclopean form began to manifest through a warp portal, his single eye blazing with sorcerous power. The very fabric of reality was tearing apart, the barrier between the material universe and the warp growing dangerously thin. If Magnus fully manifested, the entire world would fall to chaos, and the spear would be lost forever. In a moment of desperate clarity, Ragnar seized the spear and hurled it through the portal, driving it into Magnus's eye even as the demon Primarch tried to emerge. The results were catastrophic. Magnus howled in pain and rage as the spear, imbued with the essence of his hated brother Leman Russ, struck home. The ritual collapsed, the portal imploded, and Magnus was cast back into the warp. The world was saved, but the spear was lost, disappearing into the Imperium along with the banished Primarch. For many Space Wolves, this was an unforgivable act. The spear was a sacred relic, a direct link to their Primarch, and Ragnar had thrown it away. Despite Logan Grimner's assertion that Ragnar's actions had saved the chapter from disaster, many of Ragnar's battle brothers turned against him. The controversy grew so intense that Ragnar was essentially exiled from Fenris, assigned to the Wolfblade, a unit of Space Wolves who serve as bodyguards for important members of the Navis Nobilite on Terra itself. For a warrior like Ragnar, born to fight the enemies of the Imperium, this was a punishment worse than death. He was a wolf in a cage, forced to watch from the sidelines while his brothers went to war. But even in exile, Ragnar could not remain still. When he learned that the spear might be recovered from Charis, a demon world where it had materialized after Magnus cast it aside, he led a bold strike force into the heart of the warp itself. Fighting alongside the mysterious 13th Company, space wolves who had been lost in the warp for 10,000 years, Ragnar battled through demon-haunted jungles and faced Maddox once more. This time, there would be no escape for the sorcerer. Ragnar drove the spear through Maddox's black heart, ending the sorcerer's schemes permanently and recovering the sacred relic. His return to Fenris with the spear was triumphant. The stain on his honor was washed away, and he was welcomed back into Beric Thunderfist's great company, with celebrations that lasted for days. The Wolf Lord himself embraced Ragnar, telling him that he had proven himself beyond any doubt. More than that, Beric began to groom Ragnar for greater things, teaching him not just the art of war, but the craft of leadership. Beric could see what others could not. Ragnar had the potential to become one of the greatest Wolf Lords in the chapter's history. The opportunity to prove himself came sooner than anyone expected. During a campaign against greenskin forces that had invaded the Antillean Plateau, Ragnar encountered the Orc warlord Borzag Khan and his Nob's bodyguard. These were not ordinary greenskins, but blood axes, the most tactically sophisticated of all Orc clans, and they had been wreaking havoc across the sector for months. Borzag Khan himself was a monster, a towering brute whose power claw could rip apart a land raider with ease. What happened next would become legend. Ragnar, consumed by battle fury, charged headlong into the Orc formation. His packmates could only watch in awe and horror as he tore through the Nob's bodyguard like they were not there. His frostblade, a weapon of ancient craftsmanship that could freeze and shatter metal, carved through Orc flesh and armor with terrifying ease. Within minutes, every Nob lay dead or dying, and Ragnar stood face to face with Borzag Khan.
You know, as someone who's been diving deep into Warhammer lore, Ragnar's story really stands out to me. What makes this saga so compelling isn't just the action or the violence, it's the emotional core. We see a young warrior who had everything to prove, losing the one who believed in him the most. I think that's what separates great 40k stories from good ones. It's not about who has the biggest guns or flashiest powers. It's about those bonds of brotherhood, that sense of loyalty that goes beyond logic or reason. When I first read about Ragnar hunting down Goroks, I remember thinking this felt less like a military campaign and more like a Greek tragedy. Galaxy may be grimdark, but the humanity at the center of these tales, even when it's superhuman warriors we're talking about, that's what makes it all matter. Anyways, back to the story.
The duel that followed was brutal and swift. Borzag Khan was used to opponents who would try to outmaneuver him, who would use tactics and cunning to overcome his raw strength. Ragnar gave him none of that. He met the warlord's fury with fury of his own, his blade a blur of motion, each strike calculated to exploit a weakness, to create an opening. When that opening came, Ragnar took it without hesitation. His frost blade carved through the warlord's throat, and Borzag Khan fell, his war cry dying in a gurgle of blood. With their leader dead, the Orc forces collapsed. The campaign ended within days, and Ragnar was hailed as a hero. But more than that, he had done something that almost never happened in the Space Wolves. Beric Thunderfist promoted him directly from Bloodclaw to Wolf Guard, bypassing the traditional rank of Grey Hunter entirely. It was an unprecedented honor, a recognition that Ragnar was something special, a warrior who transcended the normal progression of ranks and achievements. As a member of Beric's Wolf Guard, Ragnar stood at the pinnacle of the great company. These were the elite, the veterans who had proven themselves in countless battles, who had earned the right to stand at their Wolf Lord's side. They were more than just bodyguards. They were advisors, champions, the heart and soul of the great company. To be counted among them was to be recognized as one of the finest warriors the chapter had to offer. Beric Thunderfist was not just Ragnar's commander. He was his mentor, his example of what a Wolf Lord should be. Beric had led his great company for decades, earning victory after victory through a combination of tactical brilliance and personal courage that inspired absolute loyalty in his warriors. He was known for his strategic mind, able to see patterns in the chaos of battle that others missed. But he never asked his warriors to take risks he was not willing to take himself. When battle was joined, Beric was always at the forefront, his power fist crushing any who dared stand against him. The bond between Beric and Ragnar grew strong during the campaigns that followed. Beric saw in Ragnar a reflection of his younger self, the same barely controlled fury, the same unwillingness to accept defeat, but he also saw potential that needed guidance. Ragnar's rage made him formidable, but it could also make him reckless. Beric worked to temper that rage, to teach Ragnar that a true leader needed more than just skill at arms. He needed wisdom, patience, the ability to think beyond the next engagement. For his part, Ragnar absorbed these lessons eagerly. He watched how Beric commanded, how he balanced the wild aggression that defined the Space Wolves with tactical acumen that would not have been out of place in a codex-compliant chapter. He learned how to read a battlefield, how to identify where his warriors would have the greatest impact, how to coordinate with other Imperial forces without losing the independence that was so central to Space Wolves' identity. Most importantly, he learned that a Wolf Lord's greatest strength was not his personal prowess, but the loyalty and courage of the warriors who followed him. The Great Company fought together through numerous campaigns, facing every manner of threat the galaxy could produce. They battled elder pirates in the Webway, tyrannid swarms on Hive worlds, traitor Imperial Guard regiments on Forge worlds. Each battle brought new challenges, new lessons. Ragnar distinguished himself again and again, his name becoming synonymous with courage and fury. Other Wolfguard began to look to him as a leader in his own right, someone who could be trusted to lead smaller strike forces or hold critical positions. Beric watched this development with pride, knowing that he had been right about Ragnar's potential. But pride, as they say, goes before a fall. And the fall, when it came, would be devastating. The Forge world of Bachar was a place where the Imperium's industrial might was made manifest. A world that had been transformed over millennia from a relatively pleasant agri-world into a nightmare landscape of manufactorums and refineries. Every square mile of its surface was covered with factories, smelting plants, assembly facilities, and the infrastructure needed to support them. The world's original biosphere had long since been eradicated, replaced by a carefully managed industrial ecosystem where nothing grew that was not planted by human hands, where nothing lived that did not serve the Omnissiah's will. The cities of Bachar were not built for beauty or comfort. They were functional structures designed to house as many workers as possible in the smallest possible space while keeping them close to their workstations. Hive spires rose toward perpetually darkened skies, their exteriors black with centuries of accumulated soot and chemical residue. The streets between these towers were narrow canyons where sunlight never reached, lit only by the orange glow of forge fires and the harsh white glare of industrial lighting. The air itself was barely breathable without filtration equipment, thick with particulates and chemical vapors that would scar the lungs of anyone who tried to breathe it unprotected for long periods. But for all its ugliness, Bachar was vital to the Imperium's war machine. The planet's output was staggering, capable of equipping entire Imperial Guard regiments with everything from laser guns to battle tanks in a matter of weeks. Its tech priests had achieved a level of productivity that was the envy of lesser Forge worlds, through a combination of ancient production techniques recovered from the Dark Age of technology and sheer brutal efficiency in the exploitation of their workforce. Losing Bachar would have meant millions of Imperial Guardsmen going into battle under-equipped, would have meant dozens of campaigns delayed or cancelled for lack of materiel, would have meant the deaths of countless loyal citizens of the Imperium who depended on Bachar's output for their very survival. This strategic importance made it a natural target for the enemies of mankind. And when the Khornate invasion force emerged from the warp in orbit above the planet, it was clear that this would be no mere raid or opportunistic attack. The forces that descended upon Bachar were massive, well-equipped, and driven by a fanaticism that made them terrifying opponents. They came not just to conquer, but to destroy, to reduce the planet's mighty manufactorums to rubble, to drown its forge fires in the blood of those who had worked to feed the Imperium's war effort. Khorne, the blood god, is perhaps the most straightforward of the chaos deities, which makes his followers no less dangerous for all their lack of subtlety. Khorne cares nothing for plans or schemes, has no interest in corruption for its own sake, or the slow seduction of souls. He desires only blood and skulls, violence perpetrated in his name, the death of worthy opponents in glorious combat. His followers reflect this single-minded devotion to slaughter. They are warriors, stripped of everything that might distract from the act of killing, their personalities burned away by battle lust, until only the desire for combat remains. They do not fear death, because death in battle is the greatest honor a servant of Khorne can achieve. They do not retreat because that would mean missing opportunities to kill. They do not show mercy because mercy is weakness, anathema to everything the blood god represents. A Khornate invasion is a tide of violence given form and purpose. The invading forces crash against defensive lines with a fury that seems inexhaustible, wave after wave of berserkers throwing themselves forward with no regard for casualties or tactical sense. They fight not to gain territory, but to kill, caring nothing for strategic objectives unless those objectives place them closer to the enemy. Their battle cries are hymns to slaughter. Their war drums beat out rhythms that quicken the blood and inspire murder lust, even in those who hear them from a distance. Reality itself seems to thin in their presence, the barrier between the material universe and the warp growing fragile as the sheer concentrated violence they represent tears at the fabric of existence. The initial response to the Khornate invasion was swift and overwhelming. The Imperium had learned over 10,000 years that threats to forge worlds must be dealt with immediately and with maximum force. Any delay, any hesitation, could result in the loss of production capacity that would take decades or even centuries to replace. The local Skitarii forces, cybernetically enhanced warriors who served the Adeptus Mechanicus, formed the first line of defense, their superior coordination and firepower buying time for reinforcements to arrive. But even these formidable troops found themselves hard-pressed by the sheer ferocity of the Khornate assault. For every heretic they gunned down, 2 more seemed to take their place, trampling their comrades' corpses in their eagerness to close to melee range. Space Marine reinforcements arrived within days, multiple chapters responding to the distress calls that screamed across Imperial communication networks. The Space Wolves came, as did elements of several other chapters whose names have been lost to history or classified by inquisitorial edict. Each chapter brought their own way of war to bear on the problem. The Space Wolves, with their preference for close combat and aggressive tactics, found themselves perfectly suited to the kind of grinding urban warfare that dominated the early stages of the campaign. Their Grey Hunters held critical choke points against repeated Khornate assaults, while their Bloodclaws launched counterattacks that drove the enemy back in confusion. Beric Thunderfist led his great company with the skill and experience that had made him a legend among the Space Wolves. He understood that fighting Khornate forces required a delicate balance. Show too much caution, and the enemy's momentum would carry them through your lines. Show too much aggression, and you risked falling into the trap of matching their battle lust, of letting their worship of violence turn your disciplined warriors into berserk rage monsters who fought more like their enemies than their brothers. Beric walked this line with the confidence of someone who had done it dozens of times before, his tactical acumen allowing him to identify where pressure needed to be applied and where defensive positions needed to be reinforced. The initial battles went well for the Imperials. The Space Wolves and their allies formed the tip of the spear, driving deep into Khornate-held territory and destroying their forward positions with devastating efficiency. Each Manufactorum complex retaken was another blow against the invaders' ability to establish a permanent presence on the world. Each Khornate warband shattered was a small victory in what everyone understood would be a long and bloody campaign. The Adeptus Mechanicus worked tirelessly to restore functionality to damaged facilities, even as fighting continued in adjacent sectors, determined to minimize the disruption to Bachar's production schedules. Ragnar was in his element during these engagements. As a member of Berek's Wolf Guard, he was given command of strike forces tasked with some of the most dangerous missions in the campaign. He led his warriors through the labyrinthine corridors of manufactorum complexes, where every corner could hide an ambush and every shadow could conceal a cornate berserker waiting to pounce. His frostblade claimed dozens of enemy lives, each kill adding to a tally that would have impressed even veteran Wolf Guard. His howl of fury, amplified by his helmet's voxcasters, became a sound that the enemy learned to fear, a signal that death was coming for them, wrapped in ceramite and righteous wrath. But Hornate forces are resilient and unpredictable in ways that make them especially dangerous opponents. They do not behave like rational military forces, do not retreat when outflanked, or surrender when their position becomes untenable. Instead, they adapt their attacks to the defender's strategies in ways that seem almost intuitive, finding weaknesses through trial and error, through the simple expedient of throwing bodies at problems until something breaks. For every position the Imperials captured, the traitors launched a dozen counterattacks, some of them successful, most of them suicidal, but all of them contributing to a cumulative erosion of Imperial strength. The carefully planned battle lines that had been established in the first days of the campaign began to break down as fighting spread into sectors that were supposed to be secured. Small groups of cornate warriors, bypassed during the initial Imperial advance, emerged from hiding to attack supply lines and reinforcement columns. Manufactorum complexes that had been cleared and declared safe suddenly erupted with violence as hidden enemies revealed themselves. The neat sectorial divisions that commanders relied on for coordinating their forces became meaningless as the battlefield devolved into hundreds of individual firefights scattered across the planet's surface. It was in this environment of chaos and confusion that tragedies became inevitable. Units became separated from their support elements. Commanders lost contact with their subordinates. Carefully orchestrated assaults turned into desperate melees, where individual valor mattered more than overall strategy. For all the Imperial forces' technological superiority and better training, the sheer unpredictability of fighting cornate warriors began to take its toll. Casualties mounted. Supply lines stretched thin. The certainty of ultimate victory that had characterized the early days of the campaign gave way to a grim determination to simply survive each engagement long enough to regroup for the next one. It was during one such confused engagement that disaster struck. Berek Thunderfist, leading his Wolf Guard in a push to secure a critical manufactorum complex, found himself facing Gorok's Bloodfist and his cornate warriors. Gorok's was no ordinary Chaos Space Marine. He was a champion of Khorne, a warrior who had fought for centuries in the long war against the Imperium, who had slaughtered countless enemies and offered their skulls to his dark god. His armor was stained red with the blood of 1,000 battles, and his demon-tainted axe radiated malevolence like a physical force. The exact nature of what Gorok's had become was unclear even to those who faced him. Some claimed he had achieved demonhood, that the blessing of Khorne had elevated him beyond mortal flesh into something more terrible. Others argued that he remained technically mortal, but so soaked in the power of chaos that the distinction hardly mattered. What was certain was that he possessed strength and skill far beyond that of a normal Chaos Marine, that his axe could cleave through the finest armor with ease, and that he had killed some of the Imperium's greatest heroes. Berek recognized the threat immediately. A champion of this caliber could not be allowed to rampage freely through the Imperial lines. If he were not stopped, he would carve a bloody path through squad after squad, killing dozens before anyone could bring enough firepower to bear to put him down. So Berek did what any Wolflord would do. He issued a challenge, calling Gorok's out for single combat. By the ancient laws of warfare that both sides respected, even in the midst of a chaotic melee, the combatants around them pulled back to give the champions room to fight. It should have been an even match. Beric Thunderfist had earned his name and his reputation through countless duels against the enemies of the Imperium. His power fist, the very weapon that had given him his name, had crushed the skulls of warlords and champions. He was a master of combat, able to read his opponent's moves and counter them with precision that belied his massive armored frame. But Gorox was something special, something terrible. The duel began with Beric taking the offensive, his power fist swinging in lethal arcs that would have pulverized any normal opponent. But Gorox moved with supernatural speed, his demon-tainted axe meeting each blow, turning it aside with contemptuous ease. The champion laughed as he fought, a sound like grinding metal, mocking Beric's efforts. He was playing with the Wolf Lord, demonstrating his superiority, drawing out the combat for his own amusement and for the glory of Horn. When Gorox finally struck in earnest, the result was devastating. His axe, empowered by demonic essence, cut through Beric's armor as though it were parchment. The blade bit deep into the Wolf Lord's body, and Beric's blood sprayed across the manufactorum floor. Even then, wounded mortally, Beric fought on. He managed to land one final blow with his power fist, crushing several of Gorox's ribs and driving the champion back. But it was not enough. Gorox's demon-touched constitution allowed him to shrug off wounds that would have killed a normal space marine. He circled the wounded Wolf Lord, like a predator, playing with wounded prey, and then he struck again, his axe taking Beric's head from his shoulders in a spray of blood. The Wolfguard howled in anguish and fury. The death of a Wolf Lord is more than just the loss of a commander. It is the severing of bonds that go beyond mere military hierarchy. These were warriors who had fought beside Beric for decades, who had shared his triumphs and his struggles, who loved him as a father and a brother. To see him cut down, to watch his lifeblood pool on the cold stone, was a wound to their very souls. They threw themselves at Gorox with suicidal fury, determined to avenge their fallen lord or die in the attempt. But the champion and his warriors were ready. The melee became a slaughter, Wolfguard falling one by one as Gorox's warband surrounded them. Only the timely arrival of reinforcements prevented the complete destruction of Beric's Wolfguard, driving Gorox and his warriors back and allowing the Space Wolves to recover their lord's body and precious gene seed. Ragnar was not there when Beric fell. He had been consumed by battle fury, leading his own detachment in what he thought was a critical assault on an enemy strongpoint. It was only when the Vox channels erupted with anguished howls and desperate calls for reinforcement that he realized something had gone terribly wrong. By the time he fought his way back to Beric's position, it was too late. The Wolf Lord was dead, his body already being prepared for transport back to the strike cruiser for the proper funeral rites. The grief that struck Ragnar in that moment was like nothing he had ever experienced. He had lost his mortal father to the Grimskulls, had watched his tribe slaughtered before his eyes. But that had been the tragedy of a mortal life, something brutal but understandable in the harsh world of Fenris. This was different. Beric had not just been his commander, he had been his mentor, his guide, the man who had seen potential in a hot-headed bloodclaw and nurtured it into something greater. Under Beric's tutelage, Ragnar had learned what it meant to be more than just a warrior. He had learned what it meant to be a leader. And now Beric was gone, cut down by a chaos champion who had walked away from the battle, who would go on killing, would claim more skulls for his dark god. The injustice of it burned in Ragnar's soul like acid. Beric Thunderfist deserved better than to have his death unavenged. His memory deserved better than to be one more entry in the endless casualty lists of the Imperium's wars. The Wolfguard gathered in the strike cruiser's great hall that night, Beric's body laid out on a bier in the center of the room. Tradition dictated that they should hold a wake, should tell stories of their fallen lord, should honor his memory with mead and songs. But Ragnar could not sing. He could barely speak. The rage that had always simmered within him, that had been carefully controlled and channeled under Berek's guidance, now threatened to consume him entirely. It was Brother Eagle, one of the oldest and most respected members of the Wolf Guard, who finally broke the silence. His words were simple, direct, carrying the weight of tradition and duty. Our Wolf Lord is dead. The one who killed him still walks. This cannot stand. We are Wolf Guard. We do not leave our debts unpaid. We hunt, we kill, we avenge. The vote was unanimous. Every member of the Wolf Guard pledged themselves to the hunt. They would track Gorok's Bloodfist across Barkar if necessary, would pursue him to the ends of the galaxy if that was what it took. They would have vengeance, or they would die trying, and they chose Ragnar to lead them, recognizing in him the fury and determination that this hunt would require. He was not yet a Wolf Lord, might never be, but in that moment, he was their champion, their avatar of vengeance. The hunt began immediately. Barkar was a world of countless manufactorums and hive cities, a labyrinth of steel and stone where entire armies could hide. But Gorok's Bloodfist was not trying to hide. Champions of Horn do not skulk in shadows. They glory in slaughter, seek out battle wherever they can find it. Following his trail was like following a hurricane, easy to track by the destruction it left in its wake. The strike force moved fast and light, eschewing heavy armor and vehicles in favor of speed and mobility. They tracked Gorok's warband through the ruins of captured manufactorums, through hive cities where civilians cowered in terror, through the twisted wreckage of battlefields where both sides had fought to mutual annihilation. Everywhere they went, they found evidence of Gorok's presence. Piles of skulls arranged in patterns sacred to Khorne, burning 8-pointed stars carved into walls and floors, the bodies of those who had stood against him. The hunt took days, each one feeling like an eternity to warriors consumed by the need for vengeance. They fought running battles with scattered Khornate forces, cutting through them with brutal efficiency. Any enemy who stood between them and their target was simply another obstacle to be removed. Ragnar led from the front, his frostblade reaping a terrible harvest. The rage that drove him was like a physical thing, radiating from him in waves that his brothers could feel. This was vengeance incarnate, and woe to any who stood in its path. They finally caught up with Gorok's at the Templum Incarnatus, a massive cathedral fortress that rose from the center of one of Bakar's largest hive cities. The champion had taken the structure as his own, using it as a staging ground for further attacks against the Imperial lines. His warband had fortified it heavily, turning it into a fortress that could withstand a sustained siege. But Ragnar had no intention of laying siege. Siege warfare was for those who had time, who could afford to be patient. Ragnar had neither time nor patience. He had only fury. The assault began at dawn, though on Bakar's polluted surface it was hard to tell day from night. The Wolfguard charged the Templum's main gates with a howl that echoed across the city, a sound that chilled the blood of even hardened Khornate warriors. This was not the disciplined advance of Codex-compliant space marines. This was the fury of Fenris unleashed, wolves running down their prey with single-minded determination. The gates shattered under their assault, blown apart by melter charges placed by advanced scouts. The Wolfguard poured through the breach like a tide of ceramite and fury, their bolters barking death, their blades singing songs of vengeance. The Khornate defenders met them with equal fury, and the Templum became a charnel house as the two forces collided. Ragnar fought like a demon himself, his frostblade weaving patterns of death through the enemy ranks. Every Khornate warrior who stood before him fell, their armor no protection against his rage-fueled strength. He was looking for one enemy, only one, and he would carve through a mountain of corpses to reach him. His Wolfguard fought at his side, protecting his flanks, clearing his path, each of them bound by the same oath of vengeance. They found Gorok's Bloodfist in the heart of the Templum, in what had once been the main cathedral. The champion stood atop a pile of skulls, his armor still stained with Beric's blood, his Daemon-tainted axe resting casually on his shoulder. He was waiting for them, had known they would come. Champions of Horn live for such moments, for the opportunity to test themselves against worthy foes. When he saw Ragnar at the head of the Wolf Guard, he laughed, the sound echoing through the desecrated cathedral. "So," Gorox called out, his voice a rasp of corrupted vocal cords and demon-enhanced resonance. "The pup comes to avenge his master. Tell me, little wolf, did Beric scream when my axe took his head? Did he beg for mercy? They usually do in the end. They all do." Ragnar did not respond with words. Words were for those who had something to prove, who needed to justify their actions or explain their motives. Ragnar had only vengeance, pure and simple and absolute. He charged up the pile of skulls toward Gorox, his frostblade already swinging in lethal arcs. The champion met his charge with a laugh, his axe coming up to block the blow, and the duel began. If the fight between Gorox and Beric had been a demonstration of the champion's superiority, his duel with Ragnar was something else entirely. Ragnar fought with a fury that bordered on madness. Each strike designed to kill, each movement calculated to create an opening. He was not trying to defeat Gorox. He was trying to destroy him, to erase his existence from the galaxy. The frostblade became a blur of motion, striking high and low, seeking any weakness in the champion's defense. Gorox, for his part, seemed surprised by the ferocity of Ragnar's assault. He had expected anger, of course, had counted on the young Space Marine's rage to make him predictable, easy to counter. But this was something beyond normal fury. This was the wrath of the wolf made manifest, an elemental force given form and direction. For the first time in centuries, Gorox found himself on the defensive, forced to give ground before an opponent's onslaught. The demon-tainted axe screamed through the air, its edge glowing with unholy light. Each time it connected with Ragnar's armor, it left scorch marks and corrupted metal. But Ragnar did not slow, did not show any sign that the wounds troubled him. Pain was irrelevant. Injury was irrelevant. Only vengeance mattered. His frost blade found gaps in Gorox's defense, landing cuts that would have crippled a normal space marine. But the champion was sustained by the power of chaos, his body infused with demonic essence that healed wounds as fast as they were inflicted. The duel raged across the cathedral floor, the two warriors locked in a dance of death that neither seemed able to win. Around them, the Wolfguard held back Gorox's warband, preventing any interference in the single combat. This was Ragnar's fight, his chance to avenge Beric, and they would die before they allowed anyone to deny him that. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Both combatants were bleeding from dozens of wounds, their armor rent and broken, their breathing labored. But neither would yield, neither could yield. For Gorox, this was a chance to claim another worthy skull for Horn, to prove his superiority over the forces of the Corpse Emperor. For Ragnar, this was everything. This was the moment that would define whether Beric's death meant something, whether his sacrifice had been avenged, whether the bonds of brotherhood that defined the Space Wolves were more than just empty words. The breakthrough came when Gorox overextended on a particularly aggressive strike, his axe sweeping wide as he tried to take Ragnar's head in a single blow. It was a mistake born of frustration and overconfidence, the kind of error that a warrior of Gorox's experience should never make. But Ragnar had been waiting for such a moment, had been probing the champion's defenses throughout the entire duel, looking for exactly this opening. His frostblade came up in a perfect counter, deflecting the axe strike just enough to throw Gorox off balance. Before the champion could recover, Ragnar's follow-up strike took him in the side, the frostblade's supercooled edge cutting through ceramite and flesh alike. Gorox roared in pain and fury, but Ragnar gave him no respite. A second strike took the champion in the knee, shattering bone and bringing him down to the ground. A third strike disarmed him, the frost blade severing his hand at the wrist, sending the demon-tainted axe clattering across the floor. Gorox Bloodfist, champion of Khorne, killer of heroes, lay broken at Ragnar's feet. The champion looked up at his executioner, and for a moment, something like respect flickered in his corrupted eyes. He had lived for centuries, had claimed countless skulls, had earned the favor of the blood god through acts of violence that would make normal men sick. But in the end, he had met someone whose fury exceeded his own, whose determination could not be broken, whose rage burned hotter than any demonic blessing could match. "End it," Gorox rasped, blood bubbling from his ruined lips. "End it and claim your trophy. You've earned it, pup." Ragnar did not hesitate. His frost blade came down in a final, decisive strike, taking Gorox's head from his shoulders. The champion's body convulsed once, twice, and then went still. The demonic essence that had sustained him fled back to the warp, and what remained was just meat and ceramite, another casualty in the endless war. But Ragnar was not done. The death itself was not enough. It needed to be seen, needed to be witnessed by all who served the dark gods. Gorox's warband needed to know that their leader was gone, that his promises of glory and victory had been lies, that the Space Wolves always claimed their debts. So Ragnar dragged the champion's broken body to the cathedral's highest tower, and he hurled it from the heights. 3,000 feet, the corpse fell, shattering on the pearlescent cobbles below with an impact that could be heard across the entire hive city. The effect on the Khornate forces was immediate and devastating. With their champion dead and his body desecrated, the warband lost its cohesion. Some fled, seeking to escape the Wolfguard's wrath. Others fought on with the mindless fury of those who had nothing left to lose. But without Gorox's leadership, without his terrible presence to drive them forward, they were just scattered bands of traitors, and the Wolfguard cut through them like a scythe through wheat. But Ragnar's vengeance was not yet complete. Gorox had not fought alone. His warband had included elements of the Wordbearer's traitor legion, Chaos Space Marines, who specialized in corruption and dark rituals. These were the ones who had helped orchestrate the invasion of Bahakar, who had provided the strategic planning that the mindless Khornate berserkers lacked. The Wordbearers were among the first to turn traitor during the Horus Heresy. Their entire legion dedicated to spreading the worship of chaos throughout the galaxy. They were not warriors in the simple sense that Khornate champions were. They were priests of the dark gods, corruptors of souls, architects of damnation who viewed every battle as an opportunity to spread their foul faith. On Pakar, the Wordbearers had established multiple shrines and ritual sites, places where they conducted ceremonies designed to thin the barrier between real space and the warp. These sites served both practical and spiritual purposes. Practically, they acted as anchors that made warp travel to and from Bakar easier, allowing chaos reinforcements to arrive more quickly and reliably. Spiritually, they were monuments to the dark god's glory, places where the faithful could gather to offer prayers and sacrifices to their chosen deities. The Wordbearers tended these sites with religious devotion, believing that every soul corrupted, every prayer offered to the ruinous powers, brought them one step closer to their ultimate goal, the complete overthrow of the false emperor's tyrannical regime and the establishment of a new order where the truth of chaos was acknowledged by all. Ragnar understood that simply killing Gorox was not enough. The champion had been the tip of the spear, the most visible and dangerous threat. But the Wordbearers represented something more insidious, more difficult to root out. They could rebuild what had been destroyed. They could corrupt new followers to replace those who had fallen. As long as even one Wordbearer remained on Bakar, the planet would never be truly cleansed, and Beric's death would remain unavenged in some fundamental sense. Every one of these traitors bore responsibility for the invasion, for creating the conditions that had led to the Wolf Lord's death, and every one of them would pay the price. What followed became known within the Space Wolves as the Gravespite Massacre, named after the first major engagement in this phase of the campaign. The Gravespite district had once been a residential area for the tech priests and engineers who managed Bakar's largest manufactorum complex. Now it had been converted into a fortress by the word-bearers, its hab blocks and commercial structures transformed into defensive positions, its streets turned into kill zones where any approaching force would face withering fire from multiple directions. Intelligence suggested that at least 3 full squads of word-bearers were fortified within the district, along with several hundred cultists who had been indoctrinated into the worship of chaos. A conventional assault on such a position would have required significant preparation, extensive reconnaissance, and coordination with supporting elements from other Imperial forces. It would have taken days or even weeks to properly plan and execute, with casualty projections that would make even hardened commanders pause. But Ragnar was operating on a different calculus now. Every hour that the word-bearers remained alive was an insult to Beric's memory, a stain on the honor of the Space Wolves. Speed mattered more than caution. Vengeance mattered more than casualties. The assault began without warning. Without the traditional preliminaries of orbital bombardment or preliminary artillery strikes that might give the defenders time to evacuate or reinforce. The Wolf Guard simply appeared at the district's perimeter as dawn broke over Bakar's polluted landscape, and they charged forward with the same unstoppable fury they had shown at the Templum Incarnatus. Ragnar led from the front, as always, his frostblade already singing its song of death before the first enemy even realized they were under attack. The word-bearers fought back with the desperation of those who knew no quarter would be given. They had heard what happened to Gorok's Bloodfist, had seen his broken corpse displayed for all to witness. They understood that they faced an enemy driven by something more terrible than simple military objectives. This was personal. This was vengeance stripped down to its most primal form, and so they fought not for victory, which was impossible, but simply to take as many of the Emperor's lapdogs with them as they could. The battle for Gravespite lasted 3 days, and by the end, not a single structure remained standing. The Wolf Guard fought through hab blocks turned into charnel houses, through streets slick with blood and littered with shell casings. They cleared every building, every basement, every air duct that might hide an enemy. The word-bearers tried every trick they knew, setting ambushes, using cultists as living shields, even attempting to summon demonic reinforcements through hurried and improper rituals. Nothing worked. The Wolf Guard were methodical in their brutality, working through the district with the patience of experienced hunters who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. When it was over, when the last word-bearer had been run to ground and executed, Ragnar ordered the entire district burned. The Wolf Guard doused every structure with promethium, igniting fires that would burn for weeks and could be seen from orbit. It was both practical and symbolic. Practically, it ensured that any cultists who had managed to hide would be purged along with any taint of chaos that might linger in the ruins. Symbolically, it served as a message to any other chaos forces on Bakar. The Space Wolves were coming for them, and when they arrived, there would be no mercy, no negotiation, no possibility of survival. But Gravespite was only the beginning. Intelligence gathered from captured cultists and recovered data slates revealed the locations of 11 other word-bearer positions scattered across Pakar. Some were small outposts, single squads of traitor marines using abandoned manufactorums as bases for hit-and-run attacks. Others were larger installations, full companies of word-bearers conducting major rituals that threatened to open permanent warp rifts if not stopped. Ragnar divided his forces, sending smaller strike teams to handle the minor threats while he personally led assaults on the major strongholds. The pattern repeated itself again and again across Bakar's scarred surface. The Wolf Guard would identify a target, plan a rapid assault, and execute it with brutal efficiency. The word-bearers, realizing that they were being systematically hunted, tried to band together for mutual protection, but this only made them easier targets. When they concentrated their forces, they became vulnerable to the kind of overwhelming assault that the Space Wolves specialized in. When they dispersed, they were picked off individually, unable to support each other when the Wolf Guard came calling. One particularly memorable engagement took place at the Forge of Karsus, a massive smelting facility that the word-bearers had converted into a temple to the dark gods. The traitors had spent weeks decorating the forge with blasphemous symbols, had conducted rituals using the forge workers as sacrifices, had created an environment so saturated with chaos corruption that even approaching the facility caused unprotected humans to suffer hallucinations and physical pain. A full company of word-bearers defended the site, supported by summoned demons and thousands of cultists whose minds had been broken by exposure to the warp. Ragnar's assault on the Forge of Karsus was a masterpiece of aggressive warfare. He led his Wolf Guard in a direct frontal assault on the main gates, drawing the defenders' attention and firepower, while smaller teams infiltrated through secondary access points. The battle quickly devolved into a close-quarters nightmare, bolt rounds and lass fire filling the air, chain blades meeting corrupted armor in showers of sparks. The word-bearers fought with fanatic determination, every traitor marine taking multiple killing blows before finally going down. But determination alone could not overcome the sheer fury that drove the Wolf Guard. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they pushed deeper into the forge. Demons materialized to block their path and were banished by blessed weapons and unshakable faith. Cultists threw themselves forward in human waves and were mowed down by disciplined bolter fire. Word-bearers attempted to coordinate ambushes and counterattacks, but the Wolf Guard's superior coordination and Ragnar's tactical instincts allowed them to turn every trap into a death sentence for those who had laid it. The climactic battle took place in the forge's main smelting chamber, where the Word-bearer's Dark Apostle, a leader equivalent to a Space Marine chaplain, but corrupted beyond redemption, had made his final stand. Surrounding himself with his most devoted followers and the most powerful demons he could summon, the Dark Apostle believed he had created an impregnable position. He was wrong. Ragnar cut through his defenses like they were not there, his frost blade sending demon after Daemon, screaming back to the warp, his fury overwhelming even the most battle-hardened word-bearer veterans. When the Dark Apostle himself finally faced Ragnar in single combat, the duel lasted less than a minute. The traitor's Crozius Arcanum, a sacred weapon corrupted to the service of chaos, met Ragnar's Frostblade in a collision of warp energy and ancient cold. The Frostblade won, shattering the Crozius and taking the Dark Apostle's head in a single stroke that ended both the traitor's life and the corrupting influence he had been exerting over the forge. This pattern repeated itself across Bakar over the following weeks. Each word-bearer position was identified, assaulted, and cleansed with methodical brutality. Ragnar's reputation among both allies and enemies grew with each victory. The other Imperial forces on Bakar began to speak of the Black Wolf with a mixture of awe and unease, impressed by his effectiveness but disturbed by the single-minded intensity with which he pursued his vendetta. Even other Space Wolves wondered if Ragnar had lost himself to the rage that all sons of Fenris must guard against, if he had crossed the line from righteous fury into something darker and more dangerous. But those who fought closest to Ragnar saw something that observers from afar did not. They saw that his fury was not mindless, that every assault was carefully planned, every risk was calculated. The rage that drove him was not the uncontrolled frenzy of a berserker, but rather a cold, focused anger that made him more dangerous, not less. He fought not from a loss of control, but from absolute commitment to a cause he believed in with every fiber of his being. His brothers' deaths would be avenged. The honor of the Space Wolves would be upheld. These were not negotiable points. They were fundamental truths, around which all other considerations orbited. The campaign finally ended when the last word-bearer position, a hidden shrine deep in Bakar's underhive, was stormed and destroyed. The traitor Marines fought to the last, knowing that surrender was not an option, and that death in battle was the only end available to them. When it was over, when the final word-bearer had fallen and the shrine had been demolished by melter charges, Ragnar stood among the ruins and allowed himself, for the first time in weeks, to feel something other than rage. What he felt was emptiness, a hollow sensation where the fury had been. Beric was still dead. The word-bearers were destroyed, but their destruction had not brought the Wolf Lord back, had not changed the fundamental reality of loss. Brother Eagle, who had fought beside Ragnar through every engagement of the campaign, approached and placed a hand on the young warrior's shoulder. "It is done, brother," he said quietly. "Beric is avenged. His death has been paid for in the blood of those responsible. You have done what needed to be done, and you have done it well. Now it is time to return to the living, to think about what comes next, rather than dwelling on what has been lost." Ragnar nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in Egil's words, even if accepting them was difficult. The campaign against the word-bearers had been necessary, but it had also consumed him in ways that were not entirely healthy. He had become so focused on vengeance that he had nearly lost sight of everything else, had nearly allowed his rage to define him completely. That path led to madness, to becoming lost to the wolf, in the same way that Wolfen were lost. Beric would not have wanted that. Beric had spent years teaching Ragnar how to channel his rage, how to use it as a weapon rather than letting it use him. To dishonor those teachings by losing himself to fury would be a greater betrayal than failing to avenge Beric's death. When Ragnar finally returned to the Space Wolves' lines, he was covered in the blood of his enemies, his armor a patchwork of battle damage and hasty repairs. But he carried Gorox's head, proof of his vengeance, and Beric's power fist, recovered from the champion's trophy collection. He presented both to the assembled Wolfguard, placing them at the base of Beric's memorial shrine. The Wolfguard had been waiting for his return, and when he arrived, they did something unprecedented. To a man, they dropped to one knee and pledged their loyalty not to the chapter, not to the Great Wolf, but to Ragnar himself. They recognized in him the qualities that make a true Wolf Lord: courage, strength, tactical acumen, and above all, an unbreakable bond with those who followed him. He had led them to vengeance, had guided them through the darkest period of their lives, and had emerged victorious. The formal elevation came days later, when Great Wolf Logan Grimnar himself traveled to Bakar to oversee the transition. Logan was ancient by Space Marine standards, having led the Space Wolves for centuries, and he had seen countless warriors rise and fall. But even he was impressed by what Ragnar had accomplished. To hunt down and kill a Chaos champion of Gorox's caliber was an achievement worthy of song. To do so while coordinating a complex military campaign and maintaining the loyalty of veteran warriors who had every right to question his authority, that was something special. Logan made the announcement in front of the entire great company. Ragnar Blackmane, former Bloodclaw, veteran of 100 battles, slayer of Gorox Bloodfist, would henceforth be Wolf Lord of the great company, formerly led by Beric Thunderfist. The company itself would take a new name, abandoning the title Thunderfists in favor of Blackmanes, a recognition that this was a new era, a new chapter in the company's saga. Ragnar was, at that moment, the youngest Wolf Lord in the 10,000-year history of the Space Wolves chapter. The ceremony was simple but profound. Logan presented Ragnar with Beric's power fist, which the fallen Wolf Lord had wielded with such skill. It had been repaired and sanctified by the chapter's iron priests, its machine spirit purified of any taint from its time in Gorox's possession. Ragnar accepted it with a warrior's pride, knowing that in carrying this weapon, he was carrying forward Beric's legacy. He was not just replacing Beric, he was honoring him, ensuring that the Wolf Lord's deeds and teachings would live on through those he had mentored. The impact of Ragnar's elevation rippled through the chapter. He was young, impetuous, known for his hot temper and aggressive tactics. Many of the older Wolf Lords wondered if Logan had made a mistake, if such a young warrior could truly lead a great company with the wisdom and temperance the position required. But Logan had seen something in Ragnar that others had missed, the same thing that Beric had recognized years earlier. Beneath the fury and aggression was a tactical mind as sharp as any blade. and a loyalty to his brothers that could not be questioned. Over the years that followed, Ragnar proved the skeptics wrong. He led the Blackmanes through campaign after campaign, his record of success becoming legendary. He specialized in lightning strikes and orbital assaults, bringing the fury of Fenris to bear on the enemies of the Imperium with devastating effect. Logan Grimnar regularly chose Ragnar's great company to spearhead planetary invasions, knowing that where Ragnar struck, victory would follow. But Ragnar never forgot the lessons he learned on Pakar. The death of Beric Thunderfist had taught him that even the mightiest warriors can fall, that leadership is not just about personal prowess, but about the bonds you forge with those who follow you. He led his Blackmanes with the same combination of fury and wisdom that Beric had shown, balancing the aggressive instincts that defined the Space Wolves with the tactical acumen necessary for victory. His greatest test would come during the 13th Black Crusade, when the forces of chaos launched their most devastating assault on the Imperium in Millennia. Ragnar led his Blackmanes to Cadia, the fortress world that guarded the only stable route out of the Eye of Terror. There, on bloodied battlefields beneath skies torn by warp storms, he faced foes that would have broken lesser warriors. He fought against Chaos Space Marines, who had walked with Horus during the Heresy, against demons that should not exist in real space, against traitors whose corruption ran soul deep. It was also on Cadia that Ragnar confronted his past in unexpected ways. He encountered Flesh-Tearer's Space Marines, including their leader Varain, whom Ragnar had fought beside in previous campaigns. Their reunion was complicated by old disputes and different philosophies of war, but in the end, they stood together against the Chaos Tide. He also faced a Dark Angel's Space Marine named Sorael, with whom he had a long-standing grudge dating back decades. Despite everything happening around them, the duel took place, tradition and honor demanding it. Ragnar emerged victorious, but chose mercy over death, sparing Sorel so they could both focus on their common enemy. When Cadia finally fell, torn apart by the opening of the Great Rift, Ragnar and his Blackmanes were among the last to evacuate, holding the line so that others could escape. It was vintage Ragnar, putting his warriors in the most dangerous position because he knew they could handle it, because he trusted them absolutely, and they trusted him in return. The years that followed brought new challenges and new threats. During the Psychic Awakening, when psychic phenomena exploded across the galaxy, Ragnar was tasked with confronting Gazgakul Thraka, the most powerful orc warlord in the galaxy. Their battle on Krongar became legend, Ragnar managing to decapitate the massive greenskin warlord in single combat. But the victory came at a terrible price. Ragnar was so grievously wounded that he nearly died. Only crossing the Rubicon Primaris, the dangerous procedure that transforms a space marine into the even more powerful Primaris variant, saved his life. The Ragnar who emerged from that transformation was changed but fundamentally the same. Larger, stronger, more resilient, he had lost none of the fury that defined him. If anything, his crossing of the Rubicon Primaris had only intensified his already formidable combat abilities. He was a living weapon, a force of nature given form and purpose. And that purpose remained what it had always been: to defend the Imperium, to honor the memory of those who had fallen, and to lead the Blackmanes with the same courage and determination that Beric Thunderfist had shown him. Looking back on Ragnar's saga, the battle with Gorok's Bloodfist stands out as the defining moment of his life. It was the crucible that transformed him from a talented warrior into a true leader. The grief of losing Beric, the rage that drove him to hunt down the champion, the responsibility of leading the Wolfguard in their quest for vengeance, all of these things shaped him into the Wolf Lord he would become. But more than that, the battle demonstrated something fundamental about the Space Wolves and their philosophy of war. They are not the cold, calculating warriors of chapters like the Ultramarines. They do not fight solely for abstract principles or strategic objectives. They fight for each other. for the bonds of brotherhood that link them together across the centuries. When one of their own falls, when those bonds are severed by the hand of an enemy, they respond with a fury that cannot be denied, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped. Gorok's Bloodfist learned this lesson too late. He thought he was fighting just another space marine, thought that killing Beric would simply be one more trophy in a long career of violence. He did not understand that in slaying the Wolf Lord, he had awakened something primal, had triggered a response that was written into the very genetic code of the Space Wolves. Ragnar's hunt was not just about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about maintaining the integrity of the pack, about demonstrating that attacks on the Space Wolves would never go unanswered, that every debt would be paid in full. The Chaos Champion had been powerful, had been blessed by the dark gods, had walked the path toward demonhood for centuries. But in the end, he fell to a young warrior who fought not for personal glory or the favor of any deity, but for the memory of a fallen mentor and the bonds of brotherhood that defined his existence. That is the essence of the Space Wolves, the thing that makes them different from other chapters and more dangerous than their enemies often realize. They are wolves, and wolves hunt in packs, and woe to any who threaten the pack. As for Ragnar, he carries the lessons of that battle with him to this day. The power fist that once belonged to Beric Thunderfist remains strapped to his armor, a constant reminder of the Wolf Lord who saw potential in a hot-headed Bloodclaw and nurtured it into greatness. When Ragnar leads his Blackmanes into battle, when he stands at the forefront of the line, with his Frostblade singing its song of death, he does so not just in the name of the Emperor or the Imperium, but in honor of all those who have fallen before him. Beric Thunderfist, Brother Nils who died fighting Botchulas, Svangir and Ulfgir, his wolf companions who fell in his battles with Gazgkul, and countless other brothers whose names deserve to be remembered. The saga of Ragnar Blackmane is far from over. He continues to lead the Blackmanes through the nightmare landscape of the 42nd Millennium, facing threats that would have been unimaginable when he was first recruited from the snows of Fenris. The Great Rift has torn the galaxy in half. Demon worlds leak into real space, and the enemies of humanity grow more numerous and more terrible with each passing day. But Ragnar endures, as he has always endured, driven by the same fury that allowed him to kill a Chaos Champion and avenge his fallen lord. In the end, that is what makes Ragnar's story so powerful. He is not the product of some grand destiny or chosen by fate to be a hero. He is simply a warrior who refused to let the death of someone he loved go unavenged, who channeled his grief and rage into purpose and determination. In a galaxy full of cosmic horrors and existential threats, where individual lives often seem meaningless against the scale of the conflicts being fought, Ragnar reminds us that personal bonds matter, that loyalty and brotherhood are worth fighting for, that every debt of honor must be paid. The Battle of Bachar and the hunt for Gorok's Bloodfist will be remembered as long as the Space Wolves endure. It will be sung in the great halls of the Fang, recounted to young Bloodclaws as an example of what it means to be a Space Wolf. New verses will be added to Ragnar's saga as he continues to fight, but this battle will always hold a special place, the moment when a warrior became a leader, when grief became purpose, when vengeance became legend. For those who stand against the Imperium, for the champions of chaos who think themselves invincible, for the enemies who believe that the death of one hero will weaken the resolve of the Space Wolves, the story of Ragnar and Goroks is a warning. The Sons of Rust do not forgive, they do not forget, and they always, always collect their debts. From the frozen wastes of Fenris to the farthest reaches of Imperial space, the howl of the wolf echoes eternal, a promise of vengeance to those who would harm the pack. If you've enjoyed learning about this incredible battle and want to hear more stories from the grim darkness of the far future, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The saga of the Space Wolves is filled with countless tales of heroism and sacrifice, legendary battles that have shaped the fate of entire sectors, and warriors whose deeds deserve to be remembered for all time. We're just getting started exploring the rich history of the Sons of Russ, from the founding of the chapter during the Great Crusade to their battles in the current era. Each video brings you deeper into the lore, revealing the strategies, the personalities, the triumphs and tragedies that make the Space Wolves one of the most fascinating chapters in all of Warhammer 40,000. Share your thoughts in the comments about Ragnar's greatest achievement and what other Space Wolves legends you'd like to hear about. Would you like to learn more about Logan Grimnar, the great wolf who has led the chapter for centuries? Or perhaps the tale of Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest living space marine in the Imperium, who was interred in a dreadnought thousands of years ago and still serves to this day? Maybe you're interested in learning about specific campaigns like the Months of Shame or the Siege of the Fenris system. Let us know in the comments, and your suggestions might become our next video. Until next time, may the All-Father watch over you, and may your blades never dull in the service of the Emperor. The galaxy is a dark and terrible place, filled with horrors that would break lesser souls. But as long as there are warriors like Ragnar Blackmane willing to stand against the darkness, hope endures. Remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but there are also heroes worth celebrating, and sagas worth telling. This has been the story of when Ragnar Blackmane killed a Chaos champion and became the youngest Wolf Lord in history, but it is far from the only story worth telling about the Space Wolves.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.